to 1:45 p.m. is a talk by our last but definitely not least keynote speaker, Professor Gary John Confessori, who got his doctoral degree in education from Columbia University, and he is a master learner autonomy coach. He is also a professor emeritus at George Washington University, USA. He has received the Malcolm Knoll Memorial Self-Directed Learning Award in 2007. He was also inducted into the International Adult and Continuing Education Hall of Fame in 2016. He is now in Delaware and consulting to medical college in his community. Before the talk begins, please be informed that all microphones of the participant will be muted. Should you have any questions or would like to initiate any discussion, please type your question or text in the chat box. And the topic of the talk is fostering learner autonomy, key to advancing learning in post-COVID-19. And without further ado, please virtually welcome Professor Gary John Confessori. The stage is yours, Professor.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. I'm going to do my best to try to bridge between some of the history of adult learning as it has unfolded internationally and as it has transitioned from the days when we thought that adults were just old learners rather than recognizing that adults as learners are quite different from young people or children as learners. And the things that have sort of transpired as we have gotten a better appreciation of self-directedness, self-directed learning, learner autonomy, and autonomous learning. So I'll be working to kind of bridge those things. And Tony, if you're there, if we could put a first slide up, I'd appreciate it.
For sure.
Let's just go ahead then to the, there we are. Go to my next slide, please. All right. Historically, there are some very important people in the leading educational philosophers. One of the ones that I appreciated the most was Robert Maynard Hutchins, who a very long time ago made clear that the object of education is to prepare the young to educate themselves throughout their lives rather than conveying simply information that although we are still in a period where we certainly have to emphasize the acquisition of a certain amount of information, knowledge, and skills that are critical to the whole process as we experience it in this day and age, is to recognize the fact that what we have for a body of knowledge is only transitory, that it's good for now, and we need to be actively pursuing new understandings of our world as we live in it. There are others in past decades, such leaders as Rosemary Caffarella, Philip Candy. Philip Candy, by the way, is from Australia, and judging from the accent I heard, one of our colleagues who's joined us is also from Australia. Do you know Philip? Is he not able to?
Yes, I know Phil Candy. Yep, very well. Yep.
Okay. Malcolm Knowles, of course, is one of my favorites. I was honored to be selected as one of the winners of his memorial award. But he remains probably the most important theoretician in the field of adult learning that we rely on in this day and age. Sharon Merriam, Alan Tuff have also made substantial contributions. As a group, they assert that education processes in formal and non-formal learning environments must seek to develop attitudes that foster the development of self-directedness and learner autonomy. And it keys right off of that notion that these are the personal characteristics, the psychological understanding of self and the world that you're in that makes it clear, makes it part of your inner fiber that says, I must continue to learn. I can't just go to a program, learn a little bit, go to a few years of school, get a certificate, and then just sort of rely on that information for the rest of my life. New slide, please. Thank you, Tony. What I'll be talking about throughout most of this conversation will always come back to the concept of behavioral intentions to learn. There are some key people that went long before me in helping individuals become successful learners and understanding that it requires supporting and nurturing their intentions as they are necessary to learning. What I mean by that is, if you think just for a moment, we go through life actually being quite intentional. Every once in a while, something that we did not intend to do, we do. Things happen to us, particularly if they're brought in upon us by other people acting upon us. But in terms of our own, the way we move through life, we intend to do the overwhelming majority of what we do. And a very small portion of what we do is indeed unintentional. So the question becomes then, how did you get where you are? Why did you do that? How did you do it? What were the choices that you made? What were the conditions that you found yourself in, and how did you relate to those conditions that influenced the intention to behave in a particular way? Now, before we can actually talk about the behavioral, the intent, the behaviors themselves, we need to get at the root of the understanding the behavioral intentions. And I'll be talking a good fair piece about that today as well. Tony, next slide. You'll forgive me if I keep drinking lots of water. The medications that they have me on make me very thirsty. One of the things that's always amazed me about over a lifetime and watching people very concerned about being good teachers and knowing and wanting to create useful, effective learning experiences for people is that they are driven by a sense of obligation to do a good job. And we've created in our cultures and in our various societies mechanisms by which we intend to guarantee that. So we require teachers to make detailed plans for the information that they're going to convey, the processes that they're going to use, how they're going to go about that, and so forth. And then we require them to come up with some kind of a model of oftentimes grading, or at least in the broadest sense of the word, evaluating the learner's achievement in terms of the individual's success in meeting outcome goals. So the teacher sits down and says, what do I need to have this person do at the end of the program? What am I responsible to convey to that person? What skills am I responsible to help them develop? And you go about a process of creating processes for information to be conveyed, practice to be gone through, and then evaluated before they've ever met the individuals. They're working off of experience that says, hey, you know, I know 15-year-olds, I know 5-year-olds, I know 30-year-olds. I know people who are in certain work careers, but they don't really know the individual. And that's where the critical breakdown comes, particularly in terms of what motivates them. So they also plan ways to motivate their students to engage the topic at hand. And oftentimes they do it with a carrot and stick kind of thing. You know, if you do this and you do it to the level of my expectations, I'll reward you with a good grade, with praise. I'll tell other people that I think you're smart, and I will let you feel smart, okay? Or, by the way, we have a stick that says, if you don't measure up to the standards that I set in good faith. I mean, this is not out of meanness. I know that, okay? But in good faith, they set standards that they think are going to be helpful to the individual. And for some, they are. In fact, thankfully, for many, they are. But we lose an awful lot of people for not understanding what is their true motivation, what's going on inside of them that brings them to you as a learner, not necessarily as a student. And you'll hear me saying things. I want to be clear that I differentiate what I mean. I see a great many people who make their way through formal education or even informal education experiences, certificates that are not degree oriented. They take a course for social reasons, what have you. And we look at them and say, wow, that person is a good learner. What we really have discovered about them is that they're a good student. They can do what they're told to do. They understand the instructions, they follow them carefully, they reproduce the information that we feel they need to be able to reproduce, and we label them good learner rather than good student. And what we're really trying to develop here is good learners. Next slide, please. There's a range of methods that we can engage, particularly if we're interested in understanding the difference between more teacher-directed versus more student-directed. And I won't, they range anywhere from on the more teacher-directed, that the teacher's lecturing, showing, telling, giving people examples to be worked, interactive lectures and so forth. And as you move across that screen, you get further and further towards discussion-based learning, scenario-based learning, case-based learning, collaborative learning, inquiry-based, problem-based, and project-based learning. And those things on the right-hand side tend to leave more space for the individual to insert their own concerns, not in terms of, do I want to learn this, so much as how do I relate to this? What is it to me that I can do this in a particular way? Next slide, please, Tony. One of the studies that I did recently, one second, with Sufon Ong from Malaysia. She was the professor who originally was going to make this presentation. I want you to know that I'm making it according to her outlines. I relied on that work very heavily. But we asked the question of basically secondary school students in Malaysia about how they use their time on their digital devices for, and trying to get a sense of the extent to which it was influencing the way they go about learning. We started from an observation, maybe even simply an assumption that said kids in this day and age have got this thing growing out of the palm of their hand that's a smartphone. They're using these digital devices for a number of things. And there's a huge debate going on as to whether or not teachers and schools should be relying or even using these instruments to support the learning processes in the traditional curriculum part of their education. And so we asked them a series of questions about, how do you use your cell phone, your smartphone? And if I can sort of pick out across the bottom, across the line, the group communication at the bottom of the screen carried you over past close to 90% of the use of their cell phone was in group communication. Now, some of that was indirectly related to schoolwork, but we tried to separate out schoolwork where they might be interacting with others as well, for the classmates on, we've got an assignment, how are we doing this kind of stuff. So when you put those two together, schoolwork and group communication, you can see that there was a huge percentage at the time that these young people spent on their cell phones. Somewhat less for gaming. What surprised us was somewhat even less than that in seeking information. Email and surfing and social networks seemed to be much less important than we thought they would be. But what really surprised us when we looked at it is that the notion that seeking information, it was almost second nature to them if somebody asked them a question for them to check on their cell phone. And more recently, I'm beginning to have that same kind of experience. Something comes up, somebody says, is so-and-so still alive? A well-known person, and I'll just pick my phone up and say, is so-and-so still alive? And the smartphone will tell me. Well, the kids are doing that as well too. And they're doing that fairly regularly, more than 60, 70% of their the time of day that they spend on digital devices is spent in chasing down, seeking information of that nature. So how do we feather that into the processes that are available for us to use in the support of learning opportunities for our students? We'll come back to that in a little while. New screen, please. Yeah. Trying to bridge over now into what's facing us with the pandemic, and this particular picture sort of emphasizes young people, but it's true across the board that since we've come into the pandemic, there's the challenge of maintaining safety precautions. People are losing the face-to-face experience of learning, lack of social, and down there in the lower right-hand corner, lack of social interaction and fear of alienation surprised me. I don't know how it has struck you, but I would have thought that with everything that people are doing on things like Zoom and WhatsApp and so forth would be, and the social networks, whether there are, I don't know what the most popular ones are worldwide, but there's an awful lot of concern about the amount of time that young people and people who are of work age are spending on social media. And yet there's a sense that they're becoming socially disconnected. It's almost a matter of they're using communication as their social experience rather than human interaction, if I can separate the two. And so that's also setting a standard for us as we begin to think about the extent to which the experience of the pandemic leads us to say, we have now discovered that we can do more with online learning, more with remote learning, more with informal learning, and how do we really make that work for us? Next slide, please. I should have looked over my own shoulder. These are the points that I just made. The downside is that we have students who are without reliable internet access. That is something that's surprised me as we have gone along, not just in the most recent information, but over the last few years. I've been just sort of waiting for the US to get out of the dark ages in terms of having internet availability to the people across the board. There are nations in the world that I think unfairly we think of as not as scientifically advanced as the US, who are actually better wired to the internet and whose people have better access and better use of the internet in this day and age. Next slide, please. Let's start talking about understanding learner autonomy. It goes back quite a ways. Margaret Fuller was talking about it as early as 1940s, encouraging what they at that time were calling self-cultivation by means of reading. It was the old notion that a person could basically educate themselves if they had a library card and a little bit of guidance. There were even major university curricula that were based on the great books curriculum and so forth. If you read the right stuff, you'll be an educated person. But it was a matter of you do this on your own, self-cultivation. Malcolm Knowles gave us a great launch forward when he was able to differentiate between andragogy and pedagogy. And if I may just take a second to develop that, I want to do one other thing over here. Yeah. The key difference, we're trying to simplify what Malcolm was telling us about andragogy versus pedagogy, is that adults as learners rely very heavily on experience that children simply have not accumulated yet. And so the end result is that children learn in very methodical, structured ways. Okay, some people call it crystallized learning. Okay, that is, I give you the rules and you follow the rules and you wind up at your solution. An example of where that can go wrong when you compare how a person with experience would answer a particular question. We ask the question oftentimes in the US, how long does it take to get to work? Okay. One way to solve that problem is to ask the question, well, how many miles is it? And what are the local standards with regard to speed? Well, all of the highways in my area are like 55 miles an hour, and my office is 10 miles from here. And so you can calculate. I can give you as a teacher a formula that allows you to calculate. If I give you any two of these, if I give you speed and distance, you can tell me about time. If I give you time and distance, you can tell me about speed and so forth. And so this is a crystallized way of dealing with that relationship. Now, turning to andragogy and all of that, and what we call fluid intelligence, the individual says, well, yeah, you asked me how long it takes me to get to work, and I'm going to say, that depends on what time I'm going, because traffic is different. And I know that because I drive, okay? Now, it's rather simplistic notion of, with some experience, you have new insights into how the information can be used to arrive at new understandings, okay? And that's what Malcolm was telling us, that the way adults learn and continue to expand their knowledge starts with how it fits into their experience, and they use their experience to understand what's going on around them and accelerate and advance their knowledge base in ways that young people develop over time. Some people develop it more quickly than others, but the fundamental difference is people who without much experience need to be guided by pedagogical methods. People who have substantial experience benefit from being allowed to use their experience in the learning process. Next screen, please. My good friend Lucy Guglielmino in the early 70s developed a thing that she called the self-directed learning readiness profile. And it is clearly has been used in more research on learner self-directedness than any other instrument. I have some problems with it. I'll outline in a second. Terminology changed. We began to use the term autodidaxy, influenced primarily by the French, by the way, although Alan Tuff was the one who helped us operationalize it by providing us with data on a phenomenological system. My concern with the use of self-directed learning readiness, as Lucy set it forward, is that she, how to put this, and Lucy and I have talked about this a million times. Well, let me shift over to a different instrument. How many of you know about the Myers-Briggs personality types? Maybe you've taken the instrument. It's an instrument that tells you're either introverted, extroverted, what have you. That's who you are as a personality. Okay. Well, the limitation of that is that as you answer the items, you tell the instrument what you think you are like, and it's generally what you hope you're like. And when you get all done with it, they give you 4 initials and say, well, you're an ENTJ. And the big question is, what do you do with that? And the same thing has been true with the way Lucy's instrument on self-directed learning readiness has worked historically. And that is that people go through and they tell you what they think about themselves. And then we say, well, you are relatively more or less ready for self-directed learning. But there isn't anything built into the system that helps you understand how you get from that condition, how you understand that condition in enough detail to capitalize on ways of modifying it. And that's where I get into the whole notion of understanding behavioral intentions. And Lucy doesn't look at that. Lucy looks at the activities of self-directedness and says, are you ready to engage that? Rather than are you likely to engage it as a matter of behavioral intention. Next slide, please. Oh, here's this confessory guy. My work with understanding learner autonomy really started, I was involved at the time in working with talented adolescents. And I was running, I set up and ran an early college. I was dean of a college in Vermont, and we set up an early college within the college. And tried understanding these young people in terms of their talent and their commitment to their talent and the way they continue to pursue their talent over time. And we were able to discern that there were 4 major things going on. That it was a relationship between the desire to learn, resourcefulness as a learner, initiative, and persistence. And what was borne out in our studies, we did a 10-year study on those kids, 10-year follow-up, and found that it was those issues that had carried, the ones who had high scores in those 4 areas had persisted and done well in their field. And the ones that had lower scores had kind of left it behind. They had done other things with their life. Not that they weren't successful in their own way, but they had not followed through on what they felt was important to them in their mid-teen years. That left me a little unsatisfied because I couldn't really tell an awful lot about how, again, as I was being critical of Lucy, that I couldn't really figure out what we could do with that information. If we had that, what do we do with it? How do we help these people? And it was from that we began to think in terms of the learner profile questionnaire, which preceded the learner autonomy profile. And the learner autonomy profile in its current state, I want to just check one thing. Yeah. And the learner autonomy profile in its current state measures those four things I mentioned: desire, resourcefulness, initiative, and persistence. Desire really turns out to be the way you view yourself, your view of yourself in relation to your immediate family and people who are near to you, and then the greater and lesser herd. How do you perceive yourself to be? And then whether or not you have the behaviors of being resourceful and finding resources, not just in terms of books, but in the way you approach other people, human resources, and so forth, taking the initiative and persisting in your activity. That then became the main difference between self-directedness and self-directed learning and learner autonomy and autonomous learning. So let's go to the next slide. So the construct itself of learner autonomy is presented here as a matter of conation. What is conation? Conation literally is the learner's behavioral intentions. How do you intend to behave? One of my former students, Mike Ponton, who is now long since professor in his own right, also helped us get a clearer picture of how the components of Fishbein and Ashton's model, behavioral model, could help us understand the relationship between beliefs, which are cognition, attitudes, which are affection, intentions, which is conation, and the actual resultant behaviors. And if we go to the next slide, please. If you look at it as a flow chart, our beliefs, what we believe about the world around us, helps shape our attitudes, and our attitudes and our beliefs are constantly sort of interacting with one another. They're influencing each. So there's kind of a feedback loop right there. It leads to a situation where we then develop intentions, and where the intentions come from. If we're going through life with a series of beliefs and attitudes, which are our cognition and our affection, that if something intervenes that says, based on my beliefs and my attitudes, this doesn't seem right. I don't understand this. I can't use this. I don't know how to use this. I need to know more about it. We then develop an intention. And that intention helps to explain how we move into actual behaviors. And all of that loops back to beliefs and attitudes again. Next slide, please. So within the model, beliefs represent the cognitive processes of assigning attributes to objects, where the term object and attribute are used in a generic sense, and they refer to any discriminable aspect of the individual's world. That's Fishbein and Ashton's language. They further assert that the object of a belief may be a person, a group of people, an institution, a behavior, a policy, an event, and so on. So what they're saying is that when you think in terms of a belief, the object of a belief has to do with what you believe about people or a person, institutions, groups within our society, and so forth. Next slide, please. Now we begin to build on a whole bunch of pieces. Huey Long, who was one of my favorite people in the whole world, and he was in the US, people giggle when I say Huey Long, because we had a governor of Louisiana who was very corrupt, whose name was Huey Long. No relationship to this Huey Long. But Huey Long did work he's still alive and working very actively, but his work from 89 through the late 90s, led to the kind of work that I was doing in 92, which led to the work that the next group of people, Carr, Ponton, Meyer, and Derek, were my doctoral students who chose to develop the specific information around the four issues of desire, resourcefulness, initiative, and persistence. I contend that in order for a learner to engage in autonomous learning, the learner must exhibit desire, initiative, resourcefulness, and persistence in learning. These constructs are described as conative factors because each is predicated on the individual's internal motivation to engage the learning activity. Now, and when the word internal is important here because way back at the beginning of this thing, and I'm sure way back in all of your experiences with learning events, is we always come to the thing of how do we motivate this? How do we motivate the individual to care about what we're teaching, to spend the time necessary to learn the detail of the knowledge that's being conveyed and so forth. You can't put it in there. You have to draw it out. And it's interesting to me. I'm wishing I had you in front of me where I could interact with you at least visually, maybe even allow a question or two as we go along. But the word education, the Latin that forms that word is educo. Literally, the translation of educo is, there are two different ways of translating it. One is to lead out of. And many philosophers say, yes, we are leading you out of ignorance. We're leading you out of the darkness. Okay, so as educators, we're leading you out of ignorance. There are other philosophers who say, no, what we're doing is we are leading out of you who you are and who you will become and how you will be that and what your own motivations are. What do you want out of life? And that becomes critical to this transition that we are going through and will continue to go through as we understand the need for lifelong learning. We need to be thinking of education as to lead out of the individual the resources, the intention, the initiative, and the persistence to learn. Not you can try putting it in, but it's like stuffing, I don't know, worms in a bottle or something. It's very difficult to get in. If you concentrate on getting out of the individual, what do you want out of life? What are you interested in? What keeps you going? It becomes a much more effective model. Next slide, please. This is another way of looking at the stuff that we looked at with Fishbein and Ashton model. This actually was designed by Ponton to highlight a particular aspect of this relationship between beliefs, attitudes, intentions, and behaviors. And what Mike was telling us with this particular slide was that the difference between learner autonomy and autonomous learning is that it's the beliefs and attitudes on the left-hand side, motivation, self-efficacy, and desire, that form the learner, the autonomy of the learner, if you wish, okay? Whereas the actual intentions and behaviors are the things that are in fact the autonomous learning. So one thing is a psychological hypothetical construct. We can't see it. You can't see the belief. You can't see the attitude. You can oftentimes infer the results of those beliefs and attitudes, okay? But you can't actually see them. You can't observe them and measure them directly. Whereas intentions and behaviors can be observed and measured directly. And that's when I say intentions, remember below it, we're talking about resourcefulness, initiative, and persistence as the constellation of intentions and behavior. Next slide, please. I've wrestled with this one for a very long time. Learner autonomy focuses on the understanding the capacity to productively participate in learning experiences. Confessorian Park, that's my dear Unmi Park, postulate that functional learner autonomy is a range of ability and willingness to participate in selecting and shaping learning experiences in which the learner may function independently or in concert with others. Besides the degree to which the individual is engaged in functional learner autonomy is expressed in the extent that the learner optimizes the learning process by making efficient and appropriate use of their personal resources and the resources of others. So what I'm trying to assert there is that people wanted to divide learner autonomy and self-directedness and so forth from, they wanted to be isolated, like you do it alone, okay? And that if you were doing it with others, somehow it wasn't autonomous learning, it wasn't self-directed learning and so forth. And the answer really is that it's the way you perceived and valued and use the resources around you, the resources that are internal to you that you've accumulated over the experience of your lifetime, and the resources that are around you physically and in terms of human relationships of people around you that you can use to help facilitate your learning processes. Next slide, please. Always have fun with this one. I talk in terms of dysfunctional learner dependence and dysfunctional learner independence. I'm just checking on my other slides here for a second. Move to the next slide, please. Let's define the dysfunctional learner dependence. This is something we see far too much of in this world. Dysfunctional learner dependence is characterized by substantial need for guidance and assistance regarding the learning process. This is an individual, and it's in red for a reason. This individual is unable or unwilling to undertake learning without substantial direction. It is in its extreme, this individual relies on others to shape all aspects of the learning process. And this is how we kill kids who never develop as learners, because we teach them that the way to succeed in learning and to be rewarded for what you learn is to do what you are told to do, when you are told to do it, how you are told to do it. And they get to a point where they say, you want me to learn? Okay, fine. Tell me, what do you want me to do? One of the most infuriating things that I ever experienced as a teacher, particularly in dealing with graduate students who should have known better. You could get yourself thrown out of one of my doctoral classes faster this way than anything else. They would say, what do I have to do to get an A in this course? It's not about the A in the course. Okay, it's not about what you have to do. It's about what we're here to learn together. Okay, go on to the next definition, please. Next. And dysfunctional learner independence is also creates some problems for us in society, but here we go. Dysfunctional learner independence is characterized by an inability or unwillingness to accept guidance or assistance of any type regarding the learning process. In the extreme, this individual does not allow others to participate in shaping any aspect of the learning process. These are the people who become rebellious. It's interesting to watch. I see it far too often in adults, but it's something that really worries me when I see it in a teen who has decided, I'm not doing nothing you want me to do. And they're just at odds with the teacher and society, and to their own detriment. And so the issue then is, what are we looking for? Next slide. Functional learner autonomy. It's a range of ability and willingness to participate in selecting and shaping learning experiences in which the learner may function independently or in concert with others. The degree to which the individual is engaged in functional learner autonomy is expressed in the extent that the learner optimizes the learning process by making efficient and appropriate use of their personal resources and the resources of others. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the individuals. We want to act as the guide in the learning process, the one who's drawing out of the individual the motivation to learn, and to learn in a way in which they optimize the use of human resources and material resources around them. Next slide. Oh, that doesn't show up very well. The bottom part's missing. Is there a way of adjusting that? I can tell you what's there, but you can, I don't see the bottom of that slide on my screen, but I can tell you what's there. This is a quadrants that were designed by Huey Long, which is talking about the relationship between the way the instructor or teacher views their responsibility in the learning relationship and what the student is able to cope with and looking for in the learning relationship. In quadrant one, we've got a situation where the student has high psychological control. That is, the individual student is capable of participating fully in the learning experience. They're ready, okay? And the teacher has low pedagogical control. That is, they don't feel they need to control the situation very much. I think of that as, when I think of that, I think of a situation where, let's say there's a series of courses like accounting 1, 2, and 3, all right? And no, I'm sorry, let's use the example of art appreciation, okay? We've got an individual who's coming into class who's decided they want to learn something about Renaissance arts. They're not an art major. It's one of these optional courses to round out their curriculum. They've decided that's the one they want to choose. And in fact, they have some degree of interest in it. And the teacher's saying, I don't care how you learn about it, but there's a whole lot of stuff about Renaissance art that I can convey to you and that you can absorb and give back to me examples of how you're developing an appreciation of that. But I don't have to do that rigidly, okay? I would compare that to over the next quadrant where we're talking about having high pedagogical control, where if this were an accounting 1, 2, 3 series, the instructor might say, this is accounting 1. There are certain things you must learn in this course. If you don't learn them, you are going to get killed in accounting 2. You've expressed a high psychological control in choosing accounting as your major. You knew when you came in here, we're going to have to build accounting skills over a period of 3 or more semesters. So here we go. This semester, this is what you must do. And you must do it this way, because if you don't, you are going to have trouble next semester. So this is a relationship where the student has the high psychological control and the instructor has high pedagogical control. When you go down into the third one, and what's missing off the bottom of the screen is the term low psychological control. So we've got, as opposed to high psychological control at the top. So when we get down into quadrant 3, we have an individual, the instructor with high pedagogical control and the student with low psychological readiness. This is a situation where the student doesn't know what to do. They don't have any commitment to doing it any particular way. They would like to succeed. They certainly want to learn the information. and the instructor's ready to say, okay, here's how you should, here's a way of doing it. It's not quite as rigid as up above where I was saying, you better do it this way or you're going to get killed in the next semester, okay? But in this quadrant, the teacher is saying, I understand you need some help here, okay? And I'm going to provide it. As we find our way through, we may be able to make exercise some options in the learning experience, but I'm not going to be as rigid as I might have been in quadrant 2. And in the fourth quadrant, we got a situation where the individual has low psychological control and the teacher has low psychological control. And this is the recipe for absolute disaster. The student doesn't know what to do, and the teacher doesn't think it's important to provide any specific guidance. That's the way that shakes out. And that, as you can imagine, is not a good learning experience. Next slide. Thank you, Tony. Go ahead and to the next. We need to develop the slide, Tony. And again, okay, thank you. Cyril Houle was interested in the way people, what he called learner orientation. Why are you here? Why are you learning? One of my favorite questions to ask people when I have a learning experience with them. Somebody want to help me understand where I am with regard to time? I'm rambling on here. I don't want to take up too much more time. But what Houle was interested in is this: why are you here? He described 3 different learner orientations, and I'm going to take them from right to left. Goal orientation is he described as a person who has a specific goal that they want to achieve. My goal in learning this is not necessarily related to the subject matter, although it may be, but I want to learn this because I want to get a better job. I want to learn this because I want to get a corner office. I want to learn this because for cultural reasons, it will give me skills that I think people will admire me for having. Activity-oriented people were people who were more interested in the nature of the activity itself. What are we going to do? Who am I going to be with? This may not ever get me a job, may not ever make me $1, but I'm going to enjoy doing it. And then learner orientation, which is the kind of people that I always missed in the world, is these are people there because they have a commitment to learning something. They're just interested. They want to know what this is. And they don't care if it's ever going to get them any money, or if they're going to like the people they're learning with, or if they're even going to like their instructor. They're just interested in the subject, okay? In Houle's studies, by the way, what was interesting was, and he did these now, you'll forgive me, I'm not being a sexist about this, but he did this in the 60s and early 70s. I'm sorry, he did this in the late 50s and early 60s. Men tended to be goal-oriented. They were doing things that they felt they needed to do to be good husbands and fathers and providers. Women were a bit freer to do things that they could do that were socially oriented. Oftentimes they would do things that while they were activity that they enjoyed being with other people, they would also come back with things that they could justify the fact that they had left the husband and kids for a couple of hours on a Wednesday night to go learn something. Maybe it was cooking or some other household kind of activity that would sewing or what have you. What Park was reacting to is that she was concerned the activity orientation didn't really tell the story. And I'm struggling to see the words, although I know what they are. She said that actually people that were falling into the activity core group might be socially oriented. That was the people who said, I want to go and just hang out with people I enjoy being with. And they may have some goals, like I want to learn something I could bring home to make a better household with. But there was a thing in the middle. She said, you know what? There are people who are taking on learning because they're required to do it. You've got a job. Your boss says, you want to keep your job? Learn this. You want to get promoted? Learn this. It was different from the way Houle was thinking about goal orientation. And so when she got done, she had categories of learning oriented, social oriented, required and goal oriented learning. And when we began to do studies of how those things shook out, it was interesting. Houle's original studies indicated that about 70% of people were goal oriented, 20% were activity oriented, and 10% were learning oriented. And when we got done with this, it still broke out as 10% learning oriented and 70% goal oriented, but we could really differentiate between the people who were social and required learners. And it helped us understand how do you set up a learning experience for somebody who's coming in the door with one of these orientations. Next slide, please. Another person who came up with a system that is very helpful. Again, I need some water. So how do you do this as a teacher if you've got things going on with different students with different levels of readiness to engage in the learning process? How do you accommodate them? How do you act? Gerald Groh designed this particular stage self-directed learning model, in which he said, you know, if you're dealing with a person who's truly dependent, they come in with virtually no preparation or background to engage in this. Your responsibility as a teacher is to be an authority and coach on examples of what you would do as, you know, you're coaching with immediate feedback, drill, informational lectures, overcoming deficiencies and resistance with the learners. In stage 2, an individual may be interested as a learner in a particular thing, and your responsibility as a teacher is to further their motivation, help them make more firm connections as to why they're doing it, and to guide them through the learning process. Inspiring lectures, plus guided discussions, goal setting and learning strategies are useful in that sense. Stage 3, you've got a person who's really involved. They're into this now. This is their major. This is what they care about, okay? Your responsibility as an educator is to facilitate that interest. A discussion facilitated by a teacher who participates as an equal in a seminar setting. So for instance, you know, you now have students who have are so involved that the teacher, the professor can say, good, I'm going to relax and we're going to work as colleagues on learning this stuff. We're in this together. And at stage 4, we get to the self-directed learning situation where the teacher basically is a consultant or delegator. This is what we do in internships. This is what we do in dissertation work. This is what we do in individual work and self-dedicated study groups, where these individuals are basically learning on their own and you're in there helping them. If this is their learning, you're a facilitator or a consultant and delegator.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Professor Confessori. I'm afraid the time is up.
You know, that's my last slide.
Oh, okay, that's perfect then. Thank you.
Do we have no time left for questions? I'm sorry.
But we welcome all the questions in our chat box, and then we'll be more than happy to forward those questions to you. And if you would, please select some of the questions and answer them, forward them back to us, and we will post them on our website.
Okay, great. Love to do it. I've enjoyed it. I'm sorry. I've just, one of the things for my way of thinking, we were talking about how this is going to happen more and more. I find it terribly unsatisfactory not to be able to interact with you. I would have loved to have people say, whoa, what do you mean by that? Or for me to stop and ask questions rather than simply presenting. But here it is, and I don't want to take any more of your time. I hope it's been helpful. I've certainly enjoyed spending time with you all.
And we certainly do enjoy your presentation a whole lot. And it's such a captivating presentation. And thank you very much for sharing your experience and your expertise with us. It's such an honor, and we do look forward to working with you again in the future.
I look forward to it.
And dear participants, if you would, please virtually show your appreciation to Professor Gary John Professore.
All right. We would like to sincerely thank all keynote speakers, panelists, presenters, moderators, and everyone who have contributed to the success of this conference. Since we have Professor Anthony Clark talking about a new paradigm in teacher education and staying with us the whole day yesterday and also today, the e-learning has taken place profusely in this era, and it is inevitably changing the whole paradigm, just like Professor Clark addressed. Dr. Clark is so kind sending us his PowerPoint presentation from yesterday, and our team is working so quickly, and the PowerPoint is already posted on the website for you guys. Then we have Professor John Williams sharing what it meant to move into a new era with a STEM approach, along with an interconnectedness in technology developed that enabling all the links from augmented reality, IoT, big data, cloud computing contributed to new paradigms. Also moving away from teacher-centered and move closer to more collaborative endeavor and interdisciplinary approaches. And Dr. John is also kind sending us his PowerPoint as well. Our team is also working very hard, putting all the PowerPoint on the web, but we are still waiting on the answers that being posted. Professor Wilson has shared his points on learning progression in a construct map this morning. We are challenged by the methods that they are new to us, and as it spots the idea that we could integrate the construct map into teacher education and how we could impart these concepts to our student teachers. And Professor Wilson has sent his PowerPoint presentation, and we will post it on the ITEN website as well. And last keynote impressed us with his stake on lifelong learning. The ideas of SMART do not necessarily mean good grades anymore. Individual success does have to be leveled with outcomes. Enter the Andragogy, adult learning, and we are still self-cultivated as we grow. I especially like this phrase, crystallized learning. And all the videos will be available on Facebook, YouTube, and on the website. And since the Dean, we have another engagement afterwards. So I would like to call upon our Dean of Faculty of Education to have a closing remark. But everybody, please don't leave us just yet. We still have an award ceremony that you cannot afford to miss. We have Associate Professor Pathamawadi Lemongkon, please. The spotlight is on you now.
On behalf of Quadrant University and the organizing committee, I am delighted to deliver this closing remark on the success of the first International Teachers Education Network Conference, New Paradigms in Education in the Post-COVID-19 Era, which were held virtually due to the extraordinary conditions generated by COVID-19. The committee successfully hosted the events as the plenary, keynote speakers, oral presentation sessions, and all presentations were delivered with minimum technical issues. I believe that during these 2 days, we have all had insightful, interactive discussions and great chance to share the outcomes of our research. Finally, I would like to thank our distinguished keynote speakers who share their valuable experience at the plenary sessions, panelists, all the presenters, reviewers, and all parties who have contributed their best efforts and assistance in organizing the events and ensuring the success of it. To conclude, Thank you for the great contribution and looking forward to welcome you again in the ITEN 2023.
Thank you so much. ขอบพระคุณมากค่ะ Now let me summarize the parallel session yesterday. I could see that China's security fears that Zoom cannot be that we use every day as a commonality, but it was banned in Taiwan, as mentioned by Professor Chang. There was an interesting issue that something so common can be so privileged in another country. Aside from the point, teachers are pretty much having difficulties handling the teaching and learning online, just like all others. Individual services for special needs children and children with impairments. These posed a threat during an online learning. And Dr. Naldoza from PNU, he mentioned about flexible teaching and learning network and flexible learning plan are two of my highlights that I like. Collaborative classroom-based action research is something that I'm interested and need to look into. The instructional methods were pretty much similar to the rest of the world. We have hybrid, blended, and fully online, except for high flex. And Dr. Udomlak has raised the issue of unintentional education, which has resulted in inclusive and equitable quality education. We need to address this effort since we are trying to close the gap between inequality among those privileged and those who live in remote areas. Her share on the innovation in the frontiers is very interesting. And she quoted the last one, "No one deserves to be forgotten." And I absolutely agree with her. Dr. Tang Wei raised the point that hit the nail on its head. We should care for our mental health as well as others. My pre-service teachers told me a week ago that mental health was one of the things that was most difficult to handle and manage during this pandemic. They have several meltdowns and burnouts, and that was nearly killed their passion to become teachers. And we could not overlook diversity, multiculturalism, as mentioned by audiences, that we should address racism, sexism, colonialism, and authoritarian that still existed in certain places. I had the opportunity to attend parallel sessions, and I must say that all the presentations I heard during these 2 days exceeded my expectations. They were incredibly interesting, informative, and presented progression in educational rhyme. Resiliency, creativity, and adaptability are probably keys for teachers and students to thrive in this post-pandemic era. Flexibility perhaps results in teacher empowerment and reverse teachers to be more caring to their students. Balancing the needs of students and teachers be more reciprocal when designing instructions. I'm particularly interested in research by Singapore researchers. I pick up some common themes presented here. We have these core applications and many innovative tools and platforms like Metaverse, VR, and AI used in schools, and it's truly inspired me to try it. As we grow older, we are still learning all of these while trying to answer the email and chatting with friends on the Zoom, and all that stuff are happening at one point, but it's happening right now. Also, there were many great inspiring research that I did not mention are quite excellent as well. I was just as grateful to listen and participate with my fully curious mind and gear. I hope there were additional times for the presenters to present more. I must admit there is a lot to learn in this ever-changing world, like Brian Herbert once said. The capacity to learn is a gift. The ability to learn is a skill. The willingness to learn is a choice. I would like to leave several questions. How do we envision future teachers incorporating this paradigm shift into their teaching and learning and performance in equality, pedagogy, and assessment? At the next year meeting, will any of these issues be subsided, and which of these still be of concern? I have to say that this organizing the virtual conference, we got from nosedive to barely survive and all the way to thrive. We got compliments from participants, keynote speakers, administrative teams, our president. All I could say that it all to the whole organizing team who work behind the scenes, from contacting our keynote speakers, panelists, from IT teams who were behind the website, spotlight on Zoom from the abstract and proceeding team, PR team who designed all beautiful graphic and flyers, and from many supporting team who lend their hands on this event, make this such a great experience. All I could say now, I cannot wait for this pandemic to be over, and so we could get back to our normal life and we could meet in person. And I borrow a quote from Nishant Rana: things come to an end, so better things can fall into place. The world is a cruel and tough place, and you will one day have to deal with sacrificing and letting go. But you must learn to accept these endings. For the end does not mean there is a complete finish. The end means there is a chance to start something new. This is a good time to finally say farewell to our fans, and we all can go make something new and wonderful. And right now, let's conclude this session with a presentation award. We have 4 award recipients, and I will announce by alphabetic orders, not by scores by all means. Are you ready? The first name that I announce, you will have a spotlight on you along with the certificate. The first award goes to, I'm sorry if I mispronounce, by the way, Dore Bun and Shusak Ung Chok Chai, experiences of vocational education at community learning centers in Cambodia during COVID-19. Congratulations. Please look at the camera so we could take a snapshot. Thank you. Our second award goes to Napat Suk Narusai Takun. I'm sorry if I couldn't speak it correctly. And Chatri Phai Kamta with his topic of their topics. Rethinking model-based learning, a new instruction model based on self-reflection in classroom action research. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Very nice. Third award will go to, I'm sorry if I mispronounced, Gan, maybe, sorry. And the topic is competences of Vietnamese teacher educators, narrative analysis of life stories. I'm so sorry if I mispronounce your name.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could you kindly say your name?
My name is Nguyen Thiran Ngan.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, it's difficult for others. It's
I
common.
apologize.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Last one, Laura Wong in Igorton from Singapore. The topic is Singapore Early Childhood Educators, Views of Fostering Creativity and Play, a Thematic Analysis. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Please smile to camera, and our team is taking the photo for you. Thank you. And you all have done great jobs, but we could only have 4 awards. Please accept our sincere appreciation. Anyway, I would guarantee that all the work you have done with or without the awards was excellent and valuable to the educational arena. Keep up your great works. Again, you can download the abstract book from the ITEN 2022 website, and the proceedings would be available within the next 2 weeks. Please be sure to check out and download if you want. And for AsTEN, you have 13 president meeting awaiting you in another Zoom meeting. The meeting would be about advanced planning for supporting teacher education activities in the ASEAN countries in the next coming year. Last but not least, if you can upload latest, if you would like to get an update on news and activities organized by Faculty of Education, Gase Sat University, you can visit the official Facebook page of the Faculty of Education. If any of you would like to revisit the keynotes and panelist notes, we have recorded all the sessions and will be posted on the website as well as we have it on YouTube and Facebook page. The video should be available within this week, sorry. And to end my speech, don't forget to fill in the evaluation form. You have until 6 o'clock today. And once you're done with evaluation form, you will get the e-certificate that you have attended this conference. It already shown on the screen. You can scan the QR code and go to the link, fill in the form exactly the same with the same email that you have registered to the conference, and we will verify all the information, and then your certificate will be mailed directly to your email that you registered for. All right, to end my speech, please allow me to wish you all the best for your success deliberation of this conference, and particularly wish our distinguished guests from abroad a safe and COVID-free. Conclusively, I wish honorable foreign and national speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, great success in your works. Nongrak Manorai Lau, signing off. Thank you, and we look forward to welcoming you again in ITEN 2023. Wishing you good health and happiness, very successful in your research and all the grants and everything that